This happened back in October 2015. My girlfriend, Sailor, and I had a habit of exploring forgotten places. It wasn't that we craved adrenaline, but there was something about old, abandoned buildings. The eerie silence, the sense of lost time that drew us in. The thrill of stepping into a place untouched for years, maybe even decades, gave us a strange sense of excitement. That's probably what led us to that old, decaying farmhouse one October afternoon. We'd seen it from the road countless times on our weekend drives out of town. A skeletal structure standing alone against the fields and bare trees. It looked out of place, with peeling paint and shattered windows. But there was a kind of forlorn charm that made it hard to ignore. I remember slowing down the car and glancing over at Sailor. She was already smiling, her eyes shining with that mischievous glint that always signaled trouble. "Should we?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I grinned. "Let's do it." We parked a few hundred feet away and made our way up the overgrown path. Weeds and thorny branches caught at our jeans as we walked. The house loomed above us, its warped wood creaking in the wind. Sailor pulled out her phone to snap a few pictures as we approached, while I took in the surroundings. It was strange to think that this had once been someone's home. As we got closer, an eerie feeling settled in. Every window was either broken or boarded up, and the porch sagged as we carefully stepped onto it. Sailor looked at me, her face a blend of excitement and hesitation. "You go first," she whispered, nudging me. I pushed the door, and it swung open with a loud groan. Inside was a mess. Dust, debris, and the remains of what must have been furniture covered the floor. It felt as though whoever lived here had left in a hurry, abandoning everything. Broken dishes lay scattered. An overturned chair sat in a corner, and a tarnished mirror hung crooked on the wall, reflecting only shadows. Sailor stepped in behind me, her footsteps almost silent. On the creaky floorboards, we wandered from room to room, taking in the decay and the silence. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, stained with mildew and age. Faded family portraits hung on the walls, their faces blurred by dust and neglect. The entire place felt like a snapshot of a forgotten time. Eventually, we found ourselves in the kitchen, where an old stove and a rusted refrigerator sat like relics from another era. Sailor pointed at the broken window above the sink, through which the field stretched out to the horizon. "Imagine living here," she said. I tried to picture it. Kids laughing and running through the fields, family dinners at this dusty old table. But something about the place felt off, like it was steeped in sadness. I brushed the feeling off, chalking it up to my imagination. We continued our exploration, heading upstairs. The staircase was narrow and creaked with each step. Part of me expected it to collapse under us. The second floor was just as dilapidated as the first. There were a few bedrooms, each filled with moldy mattresses and broken furniture. Sailor wandered into one room, brushing her fingers over an old vanity covered in a thick layer of dust. "This place is seriously creepy," she said with a nervous laugh. I chuckled, but an unease was building in my chest. There was a stillness, a weight in the air, like we were intruding. I shrugged it off, trying to focus on the excitement of discovery as we moved through the rooms. Sailor took more photos, documenting our little adventure. We had just stepped into the last room when she paused, her phone still raised. "Did you see that?" she asked, pointing at the window across the room. "I thought I saw someone, a face or something, upstairs when we were outside." I turned to the window and peered out, but there was nothing. Just the empty field stretching into the fading light. I shook my head, trying to brush off the discomfort creeping in. "Probably just shadows," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Sailor didn't look convinced, but she nodded. We wrapped up our exploration quickly after that, and by the time we made it back downstairs, the sun was setting. We walked back to the car in silence, both lost in thought. That night, as we reviewed the photos, we saw it. A face staring out from one of the upstairs windows in a picture Sailor had taken of the house from the road. It was faint, barely visible, just an outline in the dusty glass. But it was there, watching us. We looked at each other, and Sailor laughed nervously, trying to dismiss it. "It's probably just a trick of the light," she said, though her voice wavered. But I think we both knew it wasn't a trick. The next day, we couldn't resist. We decided to go back, hoping to debunk what we'd seen. It was daylight this time, and the house didn't seem quite as menacing. But as we approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That face in the window kept coming to mind. We walked up to the front door, and a chill ran through me as we stepped inside, the musty air enveloping us like a shroud. We climbed the stairs to the second floor and went straight to the room where we'd seen the face. But it was empty, just as decayed and abandoned as before. The window was cracked and dusty, and as I looked out, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been standing there. Then Sailor gasped, grabbing my arm. "Look!" She pointed to the floor near the window. There, in the dust, was a single set of footprints leading to the window and then back toward the door. They were fresh, the dust disturbed, as if someone had stood there, watching, and then turned away. We stood frozen, staring at the footprints in disbelief. Sailor took a step back. "We should go," she whispered. I agreed, my eyes fixed on the footprints. We hurried out of the room and made our way back to the staircase. But as we reached the top, we heard a faint creak, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards behind us. We turned, but the hallway was empty. Without a word, we rushed down the stairs, heading straight for the front door. We didn't look back. Once we were outside, we practically ran to the car, climbing in and slamming the doors shut. As I started the engine, Sailor glanced back at the house. "Did you see it?" she whispered. We drove away in silence, leaving the house behind. But the memory of those footprints and that face haunted us. And sometimes when I pass by that dark window, I swear I see it again. A pale, expressionless face, watching. I still don't know if it was someone or something inside that house. But one thing's certain, we hadn't been alone in there.
I've always had a thing for abandoned places, so when my girlfriend, Mia, told me about this old manor, a massive estate left to decay on the edge of town, I couldn't resist going to check it out. The place had its share of local legends, most involving some tragedy that forced its owners to abandon it. Nobody seemed to agree on the exact story. Some folks said a fire had driven them away. Others hinted at something darker, maybe a murder or worse. Mia's family had known about the house for years, but no one dared explore it. That was all the encouragement we needed. We pulled up to the long, winding driveway just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The place was huge, with ivy crawling up its weathered stone walls and broken windows casting a hollow gaze down at us. "Are you sure about this?" Mia asked, turning off the engine as she glanced up at the looming mansion. Her expression was a mix of excitement and unease. "We didn't drive all this way just to back out now," I said, trying to lighten the mood. She gave a nervous laugh, reaching into the back for her camera. "Right. It's just bigger than I thought." She took a breath. "All right, let's go meet the ghosts." I chuckled, opening my door. "That's the spirit." She rolled her eyes but got out, and together, we made our way to the front door, which was slightly ajar, as if welcoming us. The wood was warped from years of neglect, creaking as I pushed it open. The sound echoed down a dark hallway. Inside, Mia turned on her flashlight and swept it around the entryway. Dust motes floated in the beam, and the air smelled like mildew, something older, something that made me wonder if maybe there was some truth to the stories we'd heard. "Guess no one's been here in ages," Mia murmured, snapping a picture of the faded wallpaper. Imagine what it must have been like back in its prime, I said, picturing people in fancy clothes, music, laughter, and parties filling these now empty halls. But now it was just us, the dust, and the silence. We wandered from room to room, each one more decayed and emptier than the last. Faded portraits of stern-looking aristocrats lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow us as we passed. Eventually, we reached a vast room that looked like it had once been a ballroom. Its high, arched ceiling and large, grimy windows let in just enough twilight to cast everything in a dim, eerie light. In the center of the room stood a grand piano, its polished wood long dulled and its keys yellowed by time. "That must be the famous piano," Mia whispered, approaching it cautiously, as if expecting it to come alive. She brushed her fingers over the keys, raising a cloud of dust. "Don't suppose you know how to play," I teased. She smirked. "Only if you want chopsticks on repeat." "Guess that's not happening then," I said, unable to resist. I reached out and pressed one of the keys. A hollow note echoed through the room, sending a strange chill through me. "Still in tune," I muttered, though I couldn't quite shake the unease that had crept in. Mia seemed just as unsettled. Her eyes were fixed on something on the piano. Following her gaze, I saw a small, smudged handprint in the dust, like a child's, right above the keys. "Did you do that?" Mia asked, her voice uncertain. "No," I said quickly. "Probably just some dust that got disturbed." I didn't fully believe it myself, but I was hoping she would. We both took a step back, glancing around as if expecting to see someone else in the room with us. "Let's keep moving," Mia suggested, already heading for the door. I didn't need to be told twice. But just as we were halfway across the room, a single, deep note rang out from the piano behind us, the sound lingering in the empty space. Mia clutched my arm. "You're messing with me, right?" I shook my head, too uneasy to speak. We turned slowly, staring back at the piano. It looked untouched, but the note was hauntingly clear, still echoing in the air. Trying to laugh it off, I forced a smile. Probably just the old wood settling. You know how these places are. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded, and we continued toward the exit. We were almost there when Mia stopped, her flashlight aimed at the far end of the room. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "See what?" She pointed, her hand trembling. "By the door. I thought I saw someone standing there." I squinted into the shadows, but there was nothing, just darkness and the faint outline of the doorway. "Probably just your mind playing tricks," I said, though I wasn't so sure myself. I put a hand on her shoulder, nudging her toward the exit. "Come on, let's get out of here." But as we stepped back into the hallway, I felt it, that strange, unmistakable sensation that someone was watching us. I looked over my shoulder, and for just a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing by the piano. Tall, thin, a dark silhouette against the pale window light. We hurried through the house in silence, neither of us daring to speak. The halls seemed darker now, like the house itself was urging us to leave. Our footsteps echoed louder with each step. "You think maybe this was a mistake?" Mia asked. I wanted to reassure her, to say it was all fine, that we were just scaring ourselves. But I couldn't. "Let's just get to the car," I muttered, picking up the pace. We reached the foyer, and just as I stepped onto the front porch, I heard it, a faint, soft whisper drifting up from somewhere deep within the house. It was too quiet to make out any words, but the sound alone chilled me to my core. "Did you hear that?" Mia asked, eyes wide with fear. "Let's go. Now." We practically ran to the car, jumping in and locking the doors. Mia's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel. What was that?" she whispered. "I don't know," I replied, glancing back at the house. The windows stared back, empty and dark, hiding whatever secrets lay inside. Mia took a shaky breath and started the engine. "We're never coming back here." "Agreed." As we pulled away, I tried to shake off the lingering sense of unease. Maybe we'd just been paranoid, letting our imaginations run wild. But whatever was in that place, it felt like it didn't want us there. The piano's note echoed in my head long after, a memory that seemed to follow me even in the quiet of my own bed. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think I heard it again, a single, hollow note drifting through my mind. It's strange how places can leave a mark on you, like they've imprinted themselves on a part of you that you can never quite shake. And in those quiet moments, I sometimes picture myself back in that ballroom, the dusty keys, the handprint that hadn't been there before. And I wonder, was it a warning? Or maybe an invitation? I had driven past the old mansion hundreds of times, always wondering what stories its cracked walls could tell. Its grand but decaying structure peeked out from behind gnarled trees and a rusty gate. I tried to find something about it online, but it was as if the house didn't exist. No owner, no recent sales, no history, just a shadowy outline that sat there. One rainy Friday night, after months of joking about going in, I finally convinced my friend Matt to join me. Matt was always up for a thrill, and his eagerness somehow made me feel braver. It wasn't about breaking in or vandalizing anything. We just wanted to look around, maybe spot a fragment of history. When we arrived, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The house loomed ahead of us, shadowed and silent. The gate let out a long, mournful creak as we pushed it open, sending a flock of crows scattering from a nearby tree. As we walked up to the house, I kept expecting someone to peer down at us from one of the windows. We reached the front steps, and the house seemed to engulf us in a silence so profound that it felt like stepping into another world. I looked at Matt, who flashed me a reassuring grin before pushing open the heavy wooden door. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, carrying a faint musty scent. Dust coated everything, giving the place a silvery, otherworldly quality, and sheets draped over the furniture made it feel like we'd stumbled into a tomb. "All right," Matt said, "let's see what we're working with." We started exploring room by room, moving through the grand parlor where a crystal chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling, its once glittering jewels dulled by dust. In the dining room, an ornate table stretched nearly the length of the room, each chair positioned perfectly as though an invisible dinner party were about to begin. I tried to focus on my surroundings, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. My nerves prickled with each step, as if invisible eyes were watching. Then, as we moved into the hallway, my flashlight caught something in the corner of my eye, a figure, white and motionless, standing in the dimly lit room ahead. "Matt, do you see that?" I whispered, not daring to move. He nodded, squinting into the darkness. The figure was draped in a flowing white dress, and for a moment I thought it might just be a mannequin left behind by the previous owners. But there was something wrong with its posture, something unsettling about the way it stood, rigid and unnatural. We took a few tentative steps closer, trying to get a better look, but before we could get too close, the figure suddenly vanished, slipping out of sight around the corner. "Did you see that?" Matt looked at me, his face pale. My gut was practically begging me to leave, but curiosity held me in place. We hurried to the next room, searching for any sign of the figure. The air felt colder here. Just as we were about to give up, a soft giggle echoed through the hallway, faint but unmistakable. It sounded childlike, almost playful, and it seemed to come from the next room. "Hello?" Matt called out, his voice wavering. "Is someone there?" Silence. I could feel my skin prickling. We moved down a narrow corridor that led to a sweeping staircase, which spiraled up into the darkness. At the top of the stairs, I thought I saw the flash of white fabric disappear around a corner. "Let's check upstairs," Matt suggested, though his voice sounded less certain than before. We climbed the staircase, the wood creaking underfoot. I couldn't help but look over my shoulder every few seconds. When we reached the top, we found ourselves in a long hallway lined with doors, each one slightly ajar as if waiting for us. Matt pointed to a door at the end of the hall, the only one that was closed. "Let's check that one." As we passed each door, I felt an overwhelming urge to look inside, but something held me back, an instinct warning me to keep moving. The door at the end of the hall was larger than the others, with a tarnished brass handle and faded letters spelling out nursery. Matt shot me a nervous grin. Well, this should be interesting. He pushed the door open and we stepped inside. The room was empty, save for a rocking chair by the window. Dust motes floated in the air, catching the dim light from the window. But there, on the floor, were fresh footprints leading from the rocking chair to the door. I backed away. Matt, we need to leave. He didn't argue this time. As we turned to go, I caught a glimpse of movement in the doorway, a figure in white standing perfectly still, her face hidden by a veil of dark hair. My stomach clenched as she took a single step forward. We bolted, racing down the hall and stumbling down the staircase. We finally found the front door and burst outside. We didn't stop running until we reached the gate. On the drive back, none of us said much. We had come out here looking for a thrill, maybe a little taste of adventure, but instead, we had brushed up against something that didn't feel right. We hadn't brought anything back with us, nothing haunted or cursed, but there was a shift, a quiet understanding that had settled over us. Over the next few days, the experience replayed in my mind. Every detail, from the flash of white disappearing around corners to that strange distant giggle, felt as vivid as when we first saw it. The whole mansion had felt alive in a way I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't like I'd brought the feeling back with me, but it had left a lasting impact. I could sense it, like the way you know a storm is coming by the weight in the air. We'd taken that trip for fun, and we'd left with a newfound respect for the unknown. Whatever was in that house, whoever she was, had made it clear we weren't welcome. And maybe, after that night, we didn't need to be. The thrill of exploring places like that was still there, but it came with caution now, a line I knew I wouldn't cross again. Sometimes things are abandoned for a reason, and sometimes it's best to let them stay that way. I was a nurse at a small-town hospital, the kind of place where you're bound to bump into someone you know, whether it's a patient, a doctor, or a staff member on your shift. It had a comforting, homey feel most days, but it had its oddities too. The top floor was one of them. That was where they used to keep the psychiatric ward, a place shrouded in local myths and unsettling stories. For years, it had been closed off, locked away like a secret better left forgotten. We'd all heard the stories, even if some pretended not to believe them. Tales about shadows moving at the end of the hall, cold drafts in warm rooms, and whispers echoing through empty hallways. But it was all just talk, right? A little something to keep things interesting during the long, late-night shift. At least, that's what I thought. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I'd overheard the janitor mentioning a loose lock on the door to the ward, how it kept coming undone no matter how many times he tried to secure it. It was a Friday night, and things were quiet, with most of the patients sleeping peacefully and nothing else to keep my mind busy. I knew if I was ever going to satisfy my curiosity, this was the time. I grabbed my flashlight and took the stairs up to the top floor, each step echoing loudly in the silence. When I reached the landing, I saw the hallway stretching before me, dim and unsettling. The door to the psychiatric ward was closed, a sign reading "Ward closed" hanging crookedly on the handle like a final warning. I paused, feeling an unexpected tightness in my chest. My mind was already filling with images of the empty rooms and the patients who had once been there. This was where they had sent those who needed extra attention, people who were difficult, as the older nurses would say. I took a deep breath and pressed forward, convincing myself it was just a quick look, a chance to put the stories to rest once and for all. My hand reached for the doorknob, and with a twist, it gave way. The door creaked open, revealing a pitch-black corridor lined with doors on either side leading to the ward itself. I flicked on my flashlight and stepped inside, the beam cutting through the dust and revealing faded walls with chipped paint. Every surface seemed coated in a thin layer of grime, the air heavy with the smell of mold and stale antiseptic. Old, peeling posters lined the walls, their cheerful messages about hope and recovery feeling strangely hollow in the abandoned space. As I walked further, my footsteps seemed to echo louder than usual, the sound bouncing off the empty walls. I passed room after room, each one like a forgotten time capsule. Some had unmade beds with yellowed sheets. Others held furniture covered in dust and debris. A few rooms even had personal items: forgotten slippers, an old robe, a battered stuffed bear lying in the corner with one glass eye missing. My curiosity pushed me to keep going, even as a faint unease settled over me. Finally, I reached the end of the hallway, where a reinforced door marked Ward A loomed before me. Unlike the other doors, this one was intact, sealed shut and solid. The door had scratches around the edges, deep marks that looked like they'd been made by desperate fingers clawing at the wood. I ran my fingers over the grooves, wondering who had left them and what they had been trying to escape. As I stood there, lost in thought, I heard a faint tapping sound coming from somewhere down the hall. It was barely audible at first, like the distant sound of raindrops on a window. I turned, shining my flashlight back the way I'd come, but the hallway was empty. The tapping grew louder, echoing down the corridor as if someone were knocking on a door just around the corner. I hesitated, feeling a prickling on the back of my neck, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I took slow, careful steps, following the sound as it led me back down the hall. The tapping grew louder, filling the silence with an eerie rhythm that seemed to echo through the entire ward. I stopped at one of the doors and pressed my ear against it, listening. The tapping stopped, replaced by a soft scratching sound, like fingernails scraping against wood. The noise sent a shiver through me, and I backed away, scanning the hallway with my flashlight. The scratching continued, relentless, like someone trying to scratch their way through the door. I turned to leave, deciding I'd had enough of my little exploration. But then I heard something else, a voice, distant, coming from somewhere further down the hall. "Help me!" The words were barely a whisper. I froze, every muscle tensing as I listened, trying to figure out where the voice was coming from. The hall was empty, the doors all shut, but the voice continued, growing louder and more desperate. "Please help me!" I took a step back, the beam of my flashlight shaking as I scanned the hallway. I didn't know if it was my imagination or something else, but I felt like someone was watching me, lurking just out of sight. The voice continued, echoing down the corridor, pulling me back toward the reinforced door at the end of the hall. I tried to steady my breathing. This was just an empty ward, abandoned years ago. There was no one here, no reason to be afraid. But as I stood there, staring at the door with the scratched edges, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I took a step forward. The voice had stopped, replaced by a heavy silence. I reached the door and pressed my ear against it. For a moment there was nothing. Then I heard it again, a soft, barely audible whisper. "Help me!" I stumbled back, my heart racing as I scanned the hallway. The voice was right there, just on the other side of the door. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling, but it was locked tight. I shook the handle, desperate to open the door, to see what was inside, but it wouldn't budge. As I stood there struggling with the door, I heard it again, the sound of laughter, faint and childlike, echoing down the hallway. I turned, my flashlight shaking as I scanned the darkness, but there was no one there. The laughter grew louder, filling the corridor. "Please let me out." The voice was back, desperate and pleading, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I backed away, my heart pounding as the laughter grew louder, mingling with the desperate cries. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, caught between two worlds, one of laughter, one of despair. I stumbled back down the hallway, trying to find my way out. The laughter followed me, echoing through the empty halls until it felt like it was right beside me, whispering in my ear. I broke into a run, my footsteps echoing in the silence as I raced down the corridor. I didn't stop until I reached the door at the end of the hall, fumbling with the handle as I threw it open and burst into the stairwell. But even then, I could still hear it, the faint sound of laughter echoing down the hallway and the desperate voice pleading for help. I never went back to the old ward after that night. I never dared to doubt the stories about the ward again. Now I had a story of my own. The experience left me with a chill that lingered, the kind that makes you second-guess every shadow in an empty hallway. When I finally worked up the nerve to tell the older nurses about what I'd experienced, they shared a knowing look. One of them, a quiet woman named Helen, leaned in closer. "You've heard her too, haven't you?" "Her?" I asked, feeling an unsettling weight settle over me. Helen nodded. "There was a young woman decades ago. She was kept in that very ward, room 306. She didn't make it out, and some say she's still there, trying to get someone's attention. Those taps and faint cries, that's her calling out, hoping someone will finally listen." Another nurse, Marcy, who'd been at the hospital for over 30 years, added, "You're not the first to hear her, you know. A few of us, especially those who work the night shift, have had encounters. Little things, a flickering light, that tapping sound, or sometimes even footsteps when you know you're alone." Helen's words stayed with me, and from that night on, every creak of the old building, every draft that slipped through, seemed a little more menacing. The hospital, once a place of safety and healing, had taken on a new layer for me, a place that held secrets and restless echoes from a past that refused to stay buried. And though I'd never admit it out loud, there were nights when I felt compelled to pause by the door of the old ward, as if something beyond my understanding wanted me to listen, to acknowledge its presence. If these abandoned building tales sent chills down your spine, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life horror. Have your own spine-tingling exploration story? Share it in the comments. We'd love to hear your eerie encounters. And remember, when you're out there exploring the unknown, stay alert. Some things are just waiting for you to look away. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.